Thank you. I know New York is far away from where a lot of people live, so I just may as well throw out, my wife's from Colorado. Anyone from Colorado in the room? Yeah. Anyone from Aspen? Nice. Vail? I think Vail has better skiing, but if I tell my wife that, I'll get in a lot of trouble. So I'm going to talk about something different from the rest of the group, and what we're going to talk about is operations. And there are so many ways we can talk about operations, and so what we're going to do for the next 12 minutes is take almost a 50,000-foot view, as if you're top of the mountain about to ski down, because sometimes if you take a step back, it's easier to see where the improvements can be made. And we're at this incredible moment, which is to say that the operating profit margin of our industry is at the highest it's been since the 60s. In fact, 1959 was the last time we had an operating profit margin so high. But as I say that, there's 3 people walking out the room, and none of you are smiling, and that's because it doesn't feel that good, does it? And that's because it doesn't really feel like that. It feels worse. It feels like we've been squeezed. It feels a little bit more pessimistic. And what's happening is, as we think about on all of you are being asked to do this, which is how do we improve, how do we grow, and you're not quite sure exactly where your next ADR is going to come from, your revenue growth, what is being actually happen is you're being asked to slim down. And you're being asked to cut and to cut. And so this chart feels a bit more reflective of where we are today, which is that revenues are not growing as much as they used to, and as a result, we've been asked to slim down in our expenses. And so when you do that, when you have revenue growth that is quite low, suddenly taking risks, suddenly hiring great young kids and making bets on them and allowing them to make mistakes feels a lot worse, and it feels a lot more inflexible. And you're being asked to cut, and we're going to ask the question, which is, at what point is that cut going to be one cut too far? At what point are hotels and hospitality going to lose their identity? And so I grew up in the hotel industry. My father built about 95 hotels and resorts in the UK. I love this industry. I've worked in every job in it. And it's hard work. And it's getting harder. And I'm afraid that the hospitality industry is starting to lose its identity. Because if you can't make more money, or you don't know how to, and if you don't know where else to slim down, and you can't keep doing that, then you're going to start cutting corners. And that's the hand we've been dealt with. We've been dealt with this rough hand, and so we're going to start by looking from the mountaintops, what can we do about it? And the first thing to understand is, well, where is it coming from? And these are 2 charts that are over the same time period, but they tell a slightly different perspective, which is to say that on one side, you've got the job market, and the job market is getting more and more attractive, more and more difficult. Unemployment's at record lows, and so that's going away from you. There's a hotel, a resort, a vacation rental opening across the street from you, and they would like your staff. And on the other side, those who are staying, naturally and deservedly, are getting paid more and more, and that's creeping up towards your ADR. And so what this really means is, for you, your day is getting worse and worse and worse. The other side of it, and slightly unrelated, but you'll see how it connects, is that our industry is extremely unique. It's extremely weird in that most of our ownership actually comes from working in the industry. Most of our C-level have worked in hourly jobs, have been in bellmen, have cleaned rooms. And that is amazing. It makes us so strong, and it makes us proud, and it makes us resilient. And I fear, if I say this, I'm going to become the most unpopular person in the room. But that is also a potential hazard, because those people who are coming up with ideas are completely biased by what they've experienced over the last 20 years. And how many times have you heard anyone in this industry say they wish it operated like it did 20 years ago? The past was better. And proof of that is that as an industry, we are absolutely the lowest in terms of adopting digitalization. We almost wish the internet did not exist. Other industries have literally gone ahead of us, and as a result, if we don't do it, other people come in and do it for us or away from us. And if you want to improve, if we're at this peak in operating profit margin and we don't want it to plateau, we need to start figuring out how to improve. And the only way to do that is with information. And the best way to get that information is digitalization, because you simply cannot manage what you cannot measure. And how much of our industry are we really measuring? How much of our operations can we truly understand? I've been speaking to many of you over the last day who will tell me how archaic some of your processes are. And so if you're a revenue person in the room and you think this talk is not for you, this talk is absolutely for you. Because even you get calls from tour operators saying, this guest had this negative experience, and you have no idea how to figure out how and why and what happened, because you are not connected through digitalization to the operation yet. And so to summarize, it's harder to hire people, costs are rising, and we have this complete fear of change. And our solution at Alice is that we have to double down on what we're doing. We're not asking hotels or telling hotels or resorts to change their product. What we simply do is we have to find new ways to do it. And the best example I could give in a mountain summit is UPS. So, UPS. I've never talked about UPS on stage. This is the absolute first time. But the reason we put UPS here is they did something different. In 2005, UPS started to really analyze what they were doing in a different way. They started to put a lot of data together. And what they realized is they should only take right turns. They should literally never turn left, like Zoolander. And the reason they got there, and this is simple, but it's also complicated. They already had what you might consider to be path optimization. They already said, driver, you're going from A to B, here's the shortest way to get there. And as Alice has started building housekeeping this year, and we've been speaking to housekeeping managers, they do the same. I'm going to put housekeepers in a place where they can do the least amount of distance covered because that's going to be the most efficient way. But if you're already doing that, how do you improve? How do you actually keep going and improving? And so what you start looking at and realizing is that every single business has what we call uncontrolled factors and controllable factors. And so what they realize is by only turning right, suddenly you take some uncontrolled factors and you make them controllable. Because it turns out that most accidents on the road happen from head-on collisions. So if you're only turning right, you reduce that significantly. Also, if you're only turning right, you reduce fuel costs. Even in this amazing country, some states actually allow you to turn right on red, like you're an adult, like you can see there's no car coming. In UK, you cannot do that. But as a result, you suddenly make uncontrollable factors controllable. And so the question we're asking is, how does hospitality find its right turn? And it's a really simple equation. It's not rigorous math. Effectively, if you have a bunch of services and amenities, because that's what we do, and you look at how long it takes to deliver them and divide that by your expectation, there is your equation. And because we're in hospitality, let's add the power of smiles. And so what I'm really saying here, and I know that it's totally confusing for a second, but we'll get there, is that we're not able to really change our amenity of service, because that's cutting down. But we absolutely can control how it's delivered, the expectation that it's delivered with, and then ultimately, of course, we can control the amount of smiles. Another example of this is ketchup. So many of us through our childhood, for ketchup was such a pain in the ass. How many times did you have to hit the side of the ketchup bottle to get the ketchup out while risking it completely falling out on top of your French fries? And then what they realized is by simply changing something they could control, they could change the entire experience. Not by changing the product, but by changing the delivery of it. And so what can we control and what can we not control, and how do we change that in hospitality? Well, effectively, we can't really control seasonality. It rained this morning. Amazing. It meant loads of you couldn't ski, and you're in this room today listening to me talk. And it also was a really bad year last year for skiing. It was one of the worst years we've had because there was no snow. Can't really control that. As a result, you have occupancy issues. When you're hired into a job, you can't change its infrastructure. Emergencies happen all the time. My father's business lost itself to the recession. It happens. You have operational turnover of wages, as we've talked about, utility costs. You can't really pick up your business and move its location. And you have varying guest expectations. Of course, you have controllable things. You can control the number of systems you're using. You can control the amount of communications per task. You can control the average time of delivery. Preventative maintenance is looking after your assets, right, so that they actually operate better. The number of requests. You probably can't tell your hotel staff to smile, but you absolutely can construct the situation by which they work and are happy to do so. Management can control escalations, and every industry is turning to task assignment optimization. And so, the question is, how do we, as an industry, turn some of those uncontrollable factors into controllable factors? And I promise you, behind this, I've got a 100-page slide deck, but I'd be kicked out of the room. And so we're going to pick one, and that is staff alignment. And that is because when we come into businesses, most staff think of themselves and align themselves like this, which is to say they look at their department in the hierarchical structure. But that's not how hotels and hospitality is. We have a city, and this doesn't even take into account vacation rentals, because that's almost impossible to draw where everything is dotted around, or multiple hotels and groups. And what we've done with technology and digitalization, or the lack of it, is we've just thrown a ton of radios, pen and paper, sticky notes, and email at it. And what we've created is this chaotic, archaic mess of a system that is effectively a bunch of silos. That effectively means if you're an engineering island, you're probably not speaking to front desk island in the way that you should. And so the reason we've been able to grow over just 6 years to about 2,000 properties is because there's a whole new wave of technologies that are growing up that will allow businesses to start thinking less about islands, but more about a holistic approach to working together, allowing for actual businesses to start talking laterally, not just up and down, not just in a vertical measure. And what that really means, from an abstract, is just in a circle, where if you're given a task and you're not the person who should be performing it, you can actually identify the person who should be. A task system, a task management system, if you want. And as a result, suddenly alignment can happen and everyone starts smiling. Suddenly the revenue managers can actually use the data they get and figure out what's happening in operations and communicate. Suddenly sales does turn into operations, or operations can start working together. And so, in simple, what we're saying is, how do you take controllable factors and how do you take uncontrollable factors and move them across? And alignment means that you can start doing that in some places, right? If you have alignment, you can actually start predicting some of the emergencies that do happen on repeat. And you can deal with them, react much quicker. If you have alignment around your preventative maintenance, you can reduce your utility costs. They become more controllable because you're servicing your assets. Your guest expectations become much more predictable because guests are actually, in fact, predictable. And of course, if you can do more with less, you don't need as many staff, and the ones who you have can do much better, can do much more. And so what you start being able to do is you start being able to cut costs without cutting corners. That is to say, you can change and improve the experience without actually diminishing or limiting the product. And so the last example I'll give before they kick me off stage is simply to say I have a friend in New York, and his name's David, and he's actually a hotel asset manager for Hotel AVE. And the reason I bring him up is actually he has a business called Postscript Hospitality. It's a consulting firm for ROI for hospitality businesses. So you can hire David, and he'll send someone to your hotel or property to live there for 12 weeks, and they will identify ROIs above their cost. And he's literally sending kids. I mean, these kids come from hospitality schools, but they're kids nonetheless. And all they're doing is observing and then building spreadsheets. And then they're telling you how to enter the data into those spreadsheets every single day. Because once you have that data in front of your managers, they can actually start to figure out how they can improve, how they can keep going without cutting corners. And so what David's doing and what Alice is doing is very similar. I mean, you could go pay David the $50,000. You could go and buy an operations software for $5,000 to $15,000. This is not bizarre or unique or weird. This is the way of the future. Every industry is starting to do it. We didn't think of it. David didn't think of it. But that's effectively how other industries are thinking about improving. And so the question is, as you leave this mountain summit, is how are you going to find your right turn? So thank you very much. I'm Alex Shashou. It's nice to meet you.